How often do you think about the Oscars? About how many Oscar-winning films there are and how many you've seen? Yeah, there's a few famous Oscar-winning films that we've all seen. You know, The Godfather and Lord of the Rings and Titanic. I'm King of the World, all that stuff. But the Oscars have been running since 1927. There are currently over 1,000 films, feature-length films, which have won an Oscar. How many have you seen? I did the numbers for myself. It's not many, and I consider myself quite a movie buff. So here then is the premise of this podcast. Every episode, I and a rotating cast of 2 guests will randomly select one of the 1,000 films that have won an Oscar, watch it, and talk about it, with the only requirement being that one of the 3 people on each episode has to have never seen the movie before we talk about it. That will get difficult with Star Wars. Please note that our coverage of a movie does not constitute an endorsement of it. My least favorite movie of 2016, David Ayer's Suicide Squad, won an Oscar for Best Makeup, while my favorite movie of 2016, The Handmaiden, wasn't even nominated for anything. Please also note that our coverage of a movie is not a blanket endorsement of any or all of the people involved in it. A lot of terrible people have won Oscars. Kevin Spacey won an Oscar 20 years before he was outed as an abuser, and Roman Polanski won one 20 years after. But every film, good, bad, or in many cases mediocre, that has won an Oscar is an important part of film history just for being there. And they all, on some level, deserve a tiny bit of consideration, even if that consideration ends up concluding that it's garbage. And with all of that in mind, I'm your host, as always, Ellie McConaughey, and with me today is Connor Duffy.
Howdly, neighborino.
And Vel, no last name.
Hi, this was the weirdest episode of Cujo I've ever watched.
They proselytized to a dog.
They turned a dog into a preacher. Funniest shit I've ever seen.
Hey, ain't no law says a dog can't be a preacher for the Pentecostal Church.
I mean, if they'll let a 5-year-old, I don't see why they wouldn't let a dog.
Exactly.
And in case you can't tell from the discussion we're already starting, the movie we're here today to discuss is Marjoe, the 1972 documentary that won Best Documentary at the 45th Academy Awards. About a guy who's been a Pentecostal preacher since he was, does he say 4 or 5 in the doc?
I think his mom says like 3.5 is when he was, ordained by God.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, sure, buddy.
According to Marjoe Gortner's Wikipedia, he started becoming very popular in around 1949. So he would have been around like 5 years old at the time.
It's and what's interesting. So the premise of the doc for our audience is that he is quitting the revival circuit because he doesn't actually believe in God. The implication I sort of get from what he says, especially towards the end, is like he's kind of worried doing this will like swallow him, and he's sort of like, I want to make, and he invites a camera crew to come along with him, where he sort of like lays bare the secrets. And I sort of get the impression that he's like, if I don't like burn this fucking bridge, I will want to go back every time I'm hard up for cash.
Yeah, he's pretty blunt about that. Like near the end, he talks about like how he's at that crossroads now.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for him, he was able to get out of it.
Yeah, and he seems to, and like partially that it, and I wonder if this is. It sounds like this is also impetus for releasing the documentary, or for doing the movie, is like by doing so he is ensuring he will never go back, because like they mention in an earlier in his conversation in Texas, I think, with the other pastor and his family, that like because of the circuit's gotten so tight, they'll absolutely run him off if he burns the wrong bridges. So he's just kind of doing this as a way of saying, okay, I'm out and I can't go back because I've done this movie.
What kind of like struck me about it, and is like, oh, okay, I want to like ask your opinions on this and make sure that this isn't like me filtering it too much through my own religious and regular trauma. But like, given the life he describes having led, he is way more well adjusted than I think anyone could reasonably expect.
I mean, yeah, he's not injecting estrogen valerate.
To a certain degree, yeah. But I mean, he also notes that like when he was 14, he stopped believing any of this. He stopped caring about it, and he says he moved in with like an older woman.
Yeah, he does not elaborate what that relationship was.
Yeah, but he said, I mean, he seems to have a positive like memory of it. Like I don't know what the circumstances of that relationship were, but it is interesting to note that if you look up his biography or whatever, if you look up his Wikipedia page, Marjoe Gortner, by the way, is still alive. He's 81 years old.
If you're listening, Mr. Gortner, I quite liked your documentary.
Hmm.
Also, why? What? Why?
It just says that he spent the remainder of his teenage years as an itinerant beatnik. So, is he better adjusted than someone? Is he better adjusted than you might expect someone who spent like, you know, their childhood from like 4 onwards, being like a Pentecostal preacher and basically making millions of dollars for his parents, of which he saw none of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is definitely better adjusted.
Yeah,
He's better adjusted than you would expect.
I did like the sort of like it's not elaborated on in great detail, but I did like the beat where he talks about how his current friends, like the people he met while he was an itinerant beatnik, don't know about his time as a Pentecostal preacher. And I'm just like, man, remember when you could just like not have people know that kind of shit about you?
Yeah, like, and he specifically talks about it with his now ex-wife, but like the partner he was getting married to, where it's like it was kind of his first moment with a partner he could absolutely just kind of open up and talk about that stuff. Which, yeah, I mean, I can understand that, especially in modern, like in a modern perspective. But like, yeah, it is kind of wild where she's like, oh yeah, that's we joke about having lore now, but we I have a social media presence in some form or other. You can find some of my bad opinions. Don't. But like you see about like that you find out about this like also in like other stories of both awful and interesting people where it's just like, oh yeah, and then they just skip town and change their name and we only know about it because people were able to connect the dots, decades later. That just impossible to do now.
Relatedly, if you have good taste in podcasts, what are you doing listening to this? Da 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 da.
I will suplex you.
But if you have good taste in podcasts, you might have heard of this movie a couple times before on Behind the Bastards. It is the host of that, Robert Evans, is one of his favorite movies, and he references it pretty regularly. Actually, it was one of the reasons why when I rolled it up, I was like, ooh, I gotta give that a shot. And plus, it was our first ever documentary. I rolled a couple of other docs, but I was like, I don't want to cover a movie about Nam right now.
What could possibly be relevant about a documentary about one of the most unpopular foreign wars of intervention America has engaged with? Yeah, and I will say, like, and part of the reason I jumped onto this one, like, and like what I find fascinating was engaging with this film specifically from like the perspective of someone who is I wasn't directly in the Pentecostal space. I grew up Baptist, although it was funny hearing Marjoe talk about like you got to cut your hair. Like you're going to the Baptist spaces, they're not gonna let you fly with your long with the long hair,
Mm.
which was not the case for me. Although that is also a product of growing up on the West Coast. The West Coast could not avoid Hollywoodification, and so even the Baptists tended to be chill about that stuff, although not any of the rest of it. And it's like this, watching this preacher and seeing the exact pattern of behavior from you know professional preachers. Just like the only thing that really shifted was moving basically to TV. Is TBN starts in 1973, and that becomes the home for the exact same. For these, they no longer have to hit the road and travel. They just have to have access to a TV camera, and they can broadcast off of this TV channel. And it's like that. you can see on some level where, although Marjoe is like very clearly like pulling from older revivalist preaching styles, like he has clearly defined the aesthetic,
Mhm.
or like he is a very clear encapsulation of the aesthetic of what it means to be these types of preachers, and you know, kind of a an indication of what's to come, where you start seeing like the people are working the camera as much as they're working the cheap seats.
Mhm.
Like there's a woman later on, which from one of my favorite sections of editing, where she's talking about, oh god, I have it written.
Needing money.
Yeah, like I let me see. I wrote it down elsewhere because I was talking about it. We do have a heavy budget, and we do not use God's money for foolishness. As the camera zooms in on a massive gold brooch on her, like, on her foot.
The directorial equivalent of a subtweet.
Yeah, and it's like seeing that, and then like with like the understanding, with like growing up seeing Jan Crouch on the TV, which, for I don't know if it's specifically like who she's like referencing, but at least aesthetically it is. If you have seen the music video for Kesha's Raising Hell, like you have seen Jan Crouch in that. She was a very flamboyant woman, always with the largest costume jewelry and giant pink hair.
One of the things I noticed, and I mentioned this to you, like when you and I were talking about it, Vel, and I wanted to like see if Connor also noticed if it was like something that I like. I noticed the way like we're talking about how Marjoe's aesthetic is either very influential or like drawing on the same influence as a lot of preachers. But I noticed that very like sharp inhale he does at the end of every sentence or to punctuate everything is it's very common among this kind of like preaching.
Mm.
And I was trying to like figure out if that's a practical thing, just getting enough oxygen to get to belt every single line, or if it's like an aesthetic thing. And I was curious of your thoughts on it, Connor, because I know you come from a different religious background than me or Val.
Yeah, I come from, like, I am Irish Catholic, like, and which means, we rubbed the serial numbers off all the pagan stuff we like to do and just replaced all the statues of the goddess breeds with Saint Bridget. But it was still like, very much church every Sunday, go to mass every Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
pray the rosary. During the Easter period, we do the Stations of the Cross.
Huh.
So yeah, so like the Pentecostal evangelical, like preaching style is very much unlike anything that I experienced, like, growing up. My experiences of it are, witnessing it in, fiction, or in this case documentaries like Marjoe or Jesus Camp.
Jesus Camp was definitely something I thought of a lot while watching this, and apparently I'm not
Mm,
totally crazy because if you go to the See Also section of Wikipedia on it, it's got Jesus Camp right there.
mm.
I would say I never got a chance to see that movie. Famously, I don't watch movies, but that is also probably a very fascinating one, because I absolutely did attend a Jesus camp or two
Mm.
growing up.
Jesus,
It
this is they're kind of like films in opposition to each other because Jesus Camp is especially nowadays, like 20 years on, knowing that all these kids that you're seeing must be in their like late 20s, early 30s, it is nearly unbearably bleak.
mm.
Whereas like you get to see with Marjoe someone in his process of like exiting that that mindset.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Jesus Camp is a horror movie, and Marjoe is like a tragic comedy. It's like
Hmm.
this bittersweet tale of a man who knows that he's about to lose a very large portion of his life, but it's going to grant him the freedom to find out what the other parts of his life are supposed to be. And to your point about, the inhalation, whether or not, like, it was for a static effect or if it was like something practical. It's funny you mention, he mentions, like, listen for, this other preacher, this woman, like, she does that, like, he mentions, like, listen for a little at the start of every sentence. And and you kind of, it's funny that I didn't quite notice him saying doing it myself, but it is interesting to note that you two saw him do it as well, and it must be then a case of like it doesn't have to be either or. It must be a case of like they are belting out as quickly as possible, but then they're also and like because their heart rates go up. You start breathing fast in and out. Like your heart rate goes up, your energy goes up, you're moving faster. Like I'm sitting here in my chair and going, and it's like your whole body kind of like pumps up, and then you can let it out, and that's how you grab those people, which is, let's face it, that's their real job. Their real job is to grab those people and convince them to give them like $20.
You mentioned this in the chat when we were like, all prepping to watch the movie, that like, and I was expecting it would kind of like come up circularly. I did, but he says directly like he views what he does as kind of like a performance,
Mhm.
and in that way it
Mm.
becomes almost like character breathing, breathing in the character.
Mm.
Yeah, because like my view on it is it's both. It can be both. Is because
Hmm.
like obviously it is well, especially now if you watch a modern, the style has shifted obviously because it is 50 years later, but things have gotten a little bit more of a Joel Osteen. Things have gotten a little bit more polished. Things have gotten a little bit more slimy. But like the there is obviously a practical aspect of it. It's like you are preaching to the back seats. A lot of these places, especially the earlier ones, they start as like these big tent events where it's like, hey, you throw up a tent and you have a bunch of people, and if you some areas may get a speaker, and a speaker and a mic, but like so, but on some level, it's like you're trained. You go off of what you used to do, which is you go for the cheap seats in the very back. They need to be able to hear every word because you want everyone to get into this religious fervor,
Hmm.
where they will then be convinced to part with their money in a way that must hurt. Because obviously, if it doesn't hurt, are you really trusting God?
He explicitly talks. I don't know if he knows that's what he's doing, but he explicitly talks about like the group psychology of getting someone to start speaking in tongues
Mm.
at one point, which I thought was such an interesting. Just having this dude who's been on the inside for so long, like pulling the curtain back on how all these things work and how he knows how they work
Mhm.
is so interesting to me. The whole movie is worth it just for that shit.
That his insider knowledge, like just that like that just that bit in very early where he's sitting down with the film crew and going through, okay, here are the things you're going to need to do, yeah, you're going to cut your hair, like if they come up to you and ask you if you've been saved, this is what you say to them, because you're trying, because they
I've been washed by the same blood, brother.
yeah, because he emphasizes that for the people in that church or in that tent, wherever they might be, like for them, like saving someone is the most important thing they can do. Like they are going to believe everything that he's about to say to them, because like that is what that is an integral part of their life. And as a result, you need to know, and he goes, and he's basically saying, like, because they believe so much, here's what you need to do basically to make sure that they don't make your life difficult. And here are the rote phrases you can use to avoid getting into a long-winded conversation with someone who's going to try to, save your soul and
Convert you, yeah.
convert you. And yeah, you're right. It's fascinating to get like this insider knowledge, like right at the top, right from the very start of it. Like, so you understand almost immediately. Like, when you see him like standing in front of those crowds and giving his these big speeches, preaching to them, you yeah, you understand immediately that, maybe there's a part of him that, you know like he says himself, like he wants to make people happy. He wants to give people the opportunity to kind of like feel good, and maybe it's nice for people to kind of form this kind of, you know communal spirit, communal mind. It's the hellfire and brimstone stuff that he hates, and that's what really brings him down and drags him down. So that's the stuff that he teaches the film crew how to avoid getting into those hellfire and brimstone conversations by just going like, yeah, I'm saved, brother.
Yeah, and it's like, and that is also just kind of, and speaks to basically why he has to get out, is these events. I just from the fact that, at the end of the day, I'll call a spade a spade. They're scams. Like they are seeking out a high control group,
Mm-hmm.
That they can be that can be convinced, that can be whipped up into a religious fervor, so that they could be then manipulated into giving into putting money into the basket. And so
Mm.
they basically have to do, it's part of the performance, they have to do the hellfire and brimstone stuff. You do not One of the things that becomes readily apparent in, if you spend time, especially in like the projects, like there are always hellfire and brimstone pastors everywhere. They don't bring the hellfire and brimstone pastors in to talk for the big outreach moments.
Mm-hmm.
They bring them in to talk to to talk to believers. I never got, going to a religious high school, we never got the come to Jesus, the come to Jesus, and lay your burdens upon him lessons from chapel. We got the missionary from Africa, which, if you've seen Conclave, that should raise some red bells as to what red flags as to what his about what he was like, who literally told us that in order to love God, we must hate our parents, to a room full of high schoolers, which, okay, odds are probably most of us hated our parents. That doesn't mean you need to encourage it. But like, we got that because those types of lessons are not for the unsaved. They are for the faithful. They're there to reinforce these things of saying, and try to reinforce the control, because what does the non-Christian care about hell in that regards? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't bring in new converts by telling them convert or you're going to hell. You might get a couple, obviously, but like, you don't get the loyal ones. You bring the most fervent converts are the ones who come because they are told that they will find rest,
Mm.
rest below the cross. And it's like, and so those are always the most effective ones. Like, you don't do these types. And so, yeah, it's an expectation for these types of big for these revivalist events, because that's what the audience expects, because again, it just turns into this vicious cycle where there's no choice but to get out if you're not a fan of doing that, because you're not going to do anything else. You're not going to be allowed to do anything else.
Well, to the degree that cult tactics are more refined or more pointed, more abusive refinements of religious tactics. Note that I am not saying that all religions, or even Christianity specifically, are cults. I am an atheist, but I am not a Reddit atheist. To the point where cult tactic is just a more pointed version of a religious tactic. They open up with the stuff that is welcoming, that is come inside and lay down your burdens, and they only bring out the knives once you're in the door.
Mhm.
And like, on some level, I think that any religion which commands a degree of evangelization, not which is not, to be clear, is not all religions. Like, I feel like as an atheist I have to spend half my time hedging all of my statements, because certain kinds of atheists have given atheists just an incredibly bad reputation.
We can say we can say Dick Doc. We can
We
say it.
I can say Dick Dawkins, we can say Bill Maher,
And we can say Christopher Hitchens.
I can say Christopher Hitchens. Not every religion requires evangelization. Judaism famously, if you ask, you have to ask two more times before they'll even let you in. But to any religion that goes for a degree of evangelization is going to need to have something to get people in the door. Because if you open up with, if a Christian comes up to me and tells me, if you don't believe what I believe, you're going to hell, I'll be like, that's neat. I don't believe in your God, so I don't give a shit what he thinks about me.
Why would I care about your hell?
But if you come up to me and say, Jesus loves you, and if you believe in him, he will help you with your burdens, well, I'm not going to believe that, because I already gave that part up. But that is an easier sell.
Mm.
Yeah, significantly, and it's an easier. It's a sell that appeals. There is a reason converts always have the, and this isn't even to me being cynical, although you will see this specifically in like types of pastors, of which Marjoe was a kind, although Marjoe specifically didn't do this because his story was a little bit much more publicly known that he started at 5.
Mm-hmm. Although, quick note on that, I did find it extremely interesting how the story he tells in one like meeting is different from the story his dad tells like 2 meetings later.
Yes. No, yeah, and that's kind of what it's like, is converts always have the best testimonies, because and this is absolutely a thing that is played, like, and he talks about it, is like you always have to, can God save a dog type, type stuff is
They're saving puppy girls now?
there's
I have to edit that part out.
yes. Unfortunately, the light of the healing light of God is not enough for some of us who are too far gone. All we need, all that remains for us is the cold embrace of lithium. um,
Saint Augustine once wrote that if you
so like you see this with that, is they're playing that because again they're playing to the thing, is like they're trying to capture that same effect, is a lot of converts get paraded around or become these types of preachers because they are often the ones that do often have the juiciest stories. It'll be, I was a down and out drug addict and a pornographer, and I'm coming out of a K-hole. I'm finally getting that clarity. I'm realizing my life is absolutely in shambles, and I'm wandering around, and I pass by this church and they welcome me in, and like I hear the voice of God calling me home, and I accept it, and I walk, and I put, and I never do another hit of heroin. And it's always, you always escalate it. Also, if you're doing the grift, you always escalate it. It goes from, oh, I smoked weed, to, oh, I did black tar heroin and ayahuasca recreationally at the same time. It gets more and more extreme each time you go. And then like, but like converts always have the best ones because like it appeal, and some level of that is because you will get the people with the the bigger stories coming forward as converts, because often if you are more down, like if you are truly down in the dumps like that, the appeal of come to a loving God and understand that everything you've done can be forgiven is appealing,
Mm-hmm.
is inherently appealing.
probably also really appealing if that invitation is brought to you and you don't have to do any other work. You just have to accept Jesus into your life.
Hmm.
And then it's like, oh great, well I accepted Jesus into my life, which means basically I can do whatever I want now, right? He'll forgive me. I can, but then I'm sure once that whole honeymoon period is over, then there's the, you know, there's the dragging people through the bushes backwards, the hellfire and brimstone, and the, you know, well, we can justify the horrible things we're about to say.
So, an aspect of most religions, but of Christianity in the Anglosphere in particular, where it is still, it's not legally the state religion of most Anglosphere countries. Britain's kind of
Weird.
where I'm not. The Church of England is an incredibly complicated political institution, well before it is a church. So I'm not going into it.
It's also basically Catholicism with the serial numbers filed off in a different way, which means it has a lot of the same social dynamics of, okay, I go to mass on Easter.
Easter
Yep.
and Christmas. That's all you need to do.
That one dude really wanted to get a divorce, y'all. You don't even know.
Yeah.
Who's among us?
But the despite the fact that Christianity is still considered the default religion of most of the Anglosphere, the famously the American and British atheists don't believe in God, but the God they don't believe in is the Christian God. That kind of mindset.
Mm.
Um, Even in those contexts, very few people convert to Christianity as adults. Vast majority of people are raised in it and just don't leave, even if they're not particularly devout.
Mm.
So, in that context, someone who has converted, like actually converted, I'm not saying I'm not saying that any of those people who are like, I was a black tar smoking atheist cannibal, but I converted to Jesus and he healed all of my wounds and gave me this beautiful private jet. I'm not saying those dudes aren't being honest, but I'm saying that they can't all be smoking black tar heroin. Their teeth would be fucked up.
The price of black tar heroin would be a lot higher if there were that many people. Like I'd have a lot harder time trying. I mean,
For the record, any law enforcement agents listening, that was a joke.
that was a joke. That was a joke. And if you have any further questions, you can talk to my lawyer.
So in that context, and even if people don't necessarily know that for a fact, I think it's a thing that most people, even most Christians, can kind of sense. Most You ask most people, what religion are you? Oh, I'm a Christian. How did you become Christian? Oh, I was raised Christian.
Mm.
Therefore, an adult convert, becomes like a commodity on some level.
Extremely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can parade them around. I mean, this sounds. I mean, I'll be mean. I have 20 years of religious trauma. I'm allowed to be mean. But like, you parade them around. They become they absolutely become a fetish object to be brought in. You love to. There is such a. It's fascinating from like a marketing perspective, because like marketing does the exact same thing to try to convince you to buy products, but like you bring in testimony. There's a huge cultural cachet around testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can find one who's like authentic, that's even better, because then you don't have to lie. And that's great, because eventually you're going to say something falsifiable. Like, and someone's going to be like, no, you didn't.
Yeah, eventually someone, especially as history has marched on, and the internet has gotten more powerful, it has gotten harder to just lie to people's faces about this kind of stuff. Although Google is trying to make it easier again now.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, exactly, because it's like all it takes is going to a Coldplay concert, and next thing you know, everyone knows you're cheating on your wife with your employee.
Now everyone knows you're cheating on your wife with your employee.
And her sister is texting her saying, "Isn't this your husband?"
And in some ways, that's like a nightmarish panopticon of our own making. But we're not here to talk about the horrors of the internet.
Shout out to West Elm Caleb.
We're here to talk about Marjoe Gortner's horrifying panopticon, as he stood in the center of the Pentecostal Christian church and searched for some way to be himself.
Well, so what struck me about it is, we're here approaching Christianity. A part of the reason why I was interested in inviting Vel on is because, like, Vel, for those of you who haven't ever picked this up, I will just say is my work wife, in addition to being my friend of, like, Christ, nearly a decade. I'm so old, Vel.
We're the same age, Ellie. What does that make me?
Also old. This is my point. Except for you're not as old because everything must be worse for me. Anyway.
Ellie is 8 minutes older than you, Val, and therefore...
It's actually like a year.
I think it's like 9 months, yeah.
Yeah. The point I was making is that we wind up having lots of kind of like weird meandering conversations. And so we actually talk about religion a fair bit. And you are one of the more knowledgeable friends I have about Christianity who I can trust to not like come at it from a believer, but to not take it in bad faith, so to speak. But there's no most of the film is not actually about religion in any mechanical way.
Yeah, like Marjoe himself doesn't even, again, like he states this fairly early on as part of his whole, like, I just don't like having to talk about talking about the fire and brimstone stuff. It's like, as far as he's concerned, faith is just another way to get another way to get your high.
Mm-hmm.
And that yarn is still rattled around, 3 decades later, 5 decades later. I know how time works. And it's like, oh, religion is a drug, just like any other. You're just doing it to get high by people I wouldn't trust near my drink. But like, there is something to that where he's just, as far as he's concerned, there is no problem with doing this in the same way as like someone getting high via any other substance. He just doesn't like the fact that he has to be a downer about it.
And in a way, like, you know, like a church ceremony, whatever it is, like, whether it's the Catholic mass, or if you go to like I've been to Methodist services, which are just primarily a lot of like singing, and there's some reading. Methodism is also a lot like Catholicism, except you get to eat before you go. And there's something to be like, I think I can understand his point in like thinking of that experience as being another high, because I recently went to see the band Ghost with my wife. They were playing in Cleveland, and uh, for those who may not be familiar with Ghost, their whole aesthetic is what if Catholicism but for the devil.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, like they dressing up in like full like religious regalia. Like all of their, like most of their songs have something to do with like Lucifer or what have you, but it's also really life affirming. Like it's also really, it's great. It's this great mix of like arena rock and like heavy metal, and all of these different heavy guitar like bands. There's a guitar solo at one point, for crying out loud. And what you experience at a show like that, like at a gig, at a really good show, for a musician or an artist, or a band that you really love, you find yourself surrounded by people who are all there for the same reason, and you're all singing along to the songs, and you just feel like it, you become like this single organism, this you know myriad number of people who get locked in on like a single wavelength, and you just come out of it feeling so happy, so buzzed. Like you pass by everyone, and everyone is your friend, you know like everyone is having a good time because you all just experience the same thing. And you can get the same thing when if you go see a movie or whatever, but like live performance, like church, like what Marjoe is doing, absolutely can give you that kind of high that you might get from imbibing your favorite intoxicant, whatever that might be, like surrounded by people who you trust and who you love and who love you back, or who you at least enjoy being in the company of, I should say.
Yeah, there's a Tumblr post that occasionally gets floated around because it is legitimately funny and does kind of encapsulate, especially some of the experiences I had towards the end of my sentence. Is, I grew up in the church, and I attended, like, it was like something to the effect of like I attended a sermon and I accepted Jesus because it made me feel something good. And then I grew up later and went to a concert and felt the exact same thing and realized I just like experiencing live music.
Hmm.
And on some level that has affect that experience is the people who that is experienced people are aware of and is now actively being like used. Hillsong in Australia, one of the worst things in Australia that isn't a spider, is, if you look at anything from them, like they are now the epitome of megachurch. Their worship band, they have like 5 worship bands that all have record deals and basically are just live concerts, because it's like, yeah, there is some level of it, like it has just shifted in the aesthetics have shifted, but yeah, it is just some acknowledgement that like live group events like these create emotional experiences that can be then directed in the way that you know the
Mm,
the presenter wants. And if it's Papa at a ghost ritual saying, actually, you should enjoy your life and make
mm,
sure that if you have sex with someone, it's consensual.
mm,
It can be that, or it's a man who was kicked out of his denomination because he spoke to his dad, who was engaging in a extremely inappropriate relationship with a woman like 20 years his junior, saying, also give money to the church. It can also be that.
The music comparison is interesting because, like, there is a degree to which a live show has kind of, I don't want to say like, obviously Ghost is kind of an outlier, and I like Ghost. I like a lot of their music. Hunter's Moon does indeed rip. You heard it here last. So they're obviously an extreme example, but like the last concert I went to that wasn't like a weirdo underground hyper pop band was, I went to see Girl in Red last November with my girlfriend. Val, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. And like there were, and I couldn't even explain to you how you knew this, but like you sing along to You Stupid Bitch or Girls. You don't sing along to Serotonin or We Fell in Love in October. And no one told me that. There was no like, sign up. It's just like you instantly get the vibe and you understand, and that's sort of like the group psychology thing I was talking about. Like you read the social cues from everyone around, and it doesn't matter if like you want to speak in tongues. That's what the social cues are telling you to do, and you are a social animal at the end of the day.
Hmm. When I was at my brief foray at university before the undiagnosed ADHD caught up with me.
Love you, Val.
Uh, that's not self-deprecating. That's just true.
I know, but I also just love you. You're great.
Like we, because I went to yeah, screw it. You can't find anything about me there because it was all under my dead name. Yeah, like I went to Biola University, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, which is a very conservative Christian college in Southern California. One of my classmates was a hardcore monarchist in 2010. Several of them have gone on to work with Ben Shapiro, and so like, but as a result, because it was like the major like academic focused college, Bible college in in that area. The other big one was Azusa Pacific University, which still is very much more of a sports university, although they do have good programs, I should say. We got all kinds of denominational backgrounds, and so I absolutely spent time with people like from the Pentecostal movement and other denominations, and there was always this dynamic of you would see you'd go to chapel because it was enforced. You had to you had to have a certain amount of chapel credits in a year, and they would you would inevitably look down and you'd see people dancing off the side, like dancing in the corners, and you'd always see people just start gathering into them. And then at a certain point you'd be talking to someone and feel like, yeah, I grew up Baptist, I didn't really do that stuff, but then like I started hanging around with them and I just like it's kind of felt called to, and so they just start doing it. And like there's absolutely this all these social elements are clearly like reinforcing themselves through that, where it's like, okay, well, wait, that person has now just given me permission to dance, and so now you start doing it, and now you start doing it, and then next thing you know everyone's dancing. So it's like, yeah, there's absolutely just this like, all it takes is one person to give the next person permission to do it, and next thing you know everyone's speaking in tongues, if that's a thing that you're conditioned to believe is a thing that can happen.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. That's what's interesting, and this is a point I was going to bring up a million years ago before we got very off track. Welcome to the ADHD podcast. Is like the only instances where I think that Marjoe approaches any kind of like actual, I don't want to say religious belief, but like something akin to a philosophy, is when he talks about how when he was a teenager he really hated his parents, which fair.
Yeah.
His opening
Yeah.
monologue of how he sort of like casually, almost jokingly talks about how abusive his mother was.
Yeah, I think if my mother had forced me to recite scripture for hours on end, and then temporarily smothered me with a pillow
Or waterboarded him.
or waterboarded me when I got tired, I might resent her somewhat later on in life.
That's sort of like why I think he's not very religious, because like very quickly I think under those circumstances you might learn to regard it not as something that you believe, and something that fills your, it's like a chore, it's like a job, it is his performance, perform well.
His mother would give him
Hmm.
cues.
And yeah, he talks about how his mother had like, she would say things, speed up, slow down, you've got him there.
Call for a love offering, yeah.
But also like the very flippant way, like he sort of like laughs when he talks about it. And as someone who has had a few abusive relationships, both romantic and guardianship, in my life. I have a recurring joke about how, like, for most of my late teens and early 20s, I would tell a story about, like, someone that I thought was like a funny story, and everyone would go real fucking quiet. I'm like, oh, that wasn't actually funny, was it? That happened to me. And so I think you do sort of like, I think that on some level that's kind of like a survival technique, and as that's what I mean when I say he's a lot better adjusted than I expected, because the only moment we get a hint of philosophy out of him is he says, like, yeah, but once I got older, I realized there was no point in hating anyone. Which is honestly the closest thing to actual Christian philosophy in the entire fucking film.
Many such cases.
Many such cases.
It's very weird. It's very weird how people's philosophies seem to match up very well with Christ when you stop being a Christian.
And what struck me as tragic is, like, yeah, that's probably a fairly, if he doesn't phrase it the way a Christian would, but that is a fairly close to Christ's teachings in verbalized. But I feel like if he said that at one of these meetings, they would not be receptive to that message.
No, they're not.
No.
I remember, God, what was that? 2010, I think. There was for like the late aughties, there was an up and coming liberal, as in like philosophically, pastor by the name of Rob Bell that was like coming up. It's like we would always get his videos because it was very Apple. It was very clean, cut down, minimalist. Styling where he'd like muse on a premise in scripture or something like that. And I remember at one point he simply just said, like, dog, I don't think hell's real, or at least not for people, because the circle doesn't square on that. Which, in kind of in the same line, that is and like we've discussed this, like that is not a new discussion within within theology of like the problem of hell like kind of exists for as long as there has been a theological like philosophy on like a theological acknowledgement that hell is a place where people can go. Is the immediate question is, wait, that doesn't make sense. What about this? What about that? What about who? Dante Alighieri has a section in the first Ring of Hell because he kind of like both because it's a fanfic and he doesn't want to believe that his favorite Greeks went to hell, but also just kind of like an inherent acknowledgement that like, well, wait, but these guys existed before Christ. How does that work? And so he just says as like that. He just kind of says like, I don't think a truly loving God would be able to do this. And he immediately went from up and coming poster boy of Christian youth to absolutely gone from these youth groups because of that stuff, and because he dared to question, he dared to phrase something that wasn't even strictly speaking heterodox in a way that did go against the accepted way to talk about these things.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I keep coming back to the cult analogy because, like, I'm not big on like, not just Christianity, any religion. Like, I find it kind of interesting as a political force because that's my area of study. Also film, which I don't think I need to state at this point. 40 episodes into a film podcast. But like, I find it interesting as a political force. But like, if we again go back to like the cult model, which is something that I've read a lot about because I find it interesting because I'm sick in the head. If you do need, like, in order to keep someone in the cult, especially once you reach the point where, to use an example from this movie, he's saying, hey, I want to give you these prayer, what were they, like, kerchiefs or something, like
They're bandanas.
Bandanas, prayer bandanas. They honestly remind me of like the Buddhist prayer flag an ex-girlfriend of mine had. And he says, whatever the biggest bill you have, that's what you're given for this. In order to get someone to that point, in order to get someone to the point where they can hear that and not go, wait, what the fuck? You need a carrot and you also need a stick.
Mm-hmm.
You need, and hell is the stick that Christianity has chosen. Maybe not like all at once, but the Protestant Reformation was largely built off of one dude who was terrified of going to hell.
Yeah,
I'm oversimplifying, don't
yeah. Like people like to talk. I mean, like, and I'm not even necessarily disagreeing or trying to foment beef.
Love beef.
We love beef. Reality is structured like a forum beef. But like people talk about how like Protestantism is like one of the fundamental tenets of Protestantism is saved by faith, is a rejection of work to save you. And like we can talk about like the philosophical implication of that. There is a point to be made about how that directly leads to Connor, what you referenced earlier, of like, well, I can just be forgiven, so it doesn't matter. I don't have to be a good person, and like I can still just be an absolute like philandering, thieving rapist, and as long as I say the prayer at like a prayer before I die, I will probably go into heaven, and even if I forget, it's probably still fine. Like as much as we can talk about how some of that stuff, some of that behavior is allowed specifically from that, like it is also speaking from the fact that like just because that is a core tenet of all Protestantism or at least Protestant churches, like doesn't mean that suddenly the fire and brimstone stopped. Like it's still used as a stick, which is kind of fascinating. It's like it's simultaneously one of those like, oh yeah, no, there's like bad. Like we should probably have a conversation about how if I don't give money to the church to fund this overpriced cathedral in
Brazil.
Spain. I'm sorry, Spain. No, it wasn't in Brazil. It was built with gold stolen from Brazil.
Oh, I was
Mm.
thinking of the one. What's his? That Marjoe's dad, I think, was talking about. How he just bought land in Brazil.
Oh yeah, no, I'm speaking more
Yeah.
from like Luther's perspective of like
Oh yeah.
as much as that's like you know hey, it's really bad that like because I didn't do this I could go to hell, or I'll spend more time in purgatory before I can go into heaven, and purgatory is not hell but that isn't necessarily good, like blah 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 blah. Like as much as like there's this fundamental cause for the Protestant Reformation, like they almost immediately go back and patch it to say, oh, but like if you don't do good things, that means that you were never really saved. So because like you should be doing good things because you're saved, because the love of the light of God is inside of you because you were saved, so like you should be doing good things, and then good things are giving money to the church to fund our to so that I can buy my next Cadillac.
What is the preacher up there saying that if you don't give money, so much money that it hurts a little bit, but the 1972 equivalent of an indulgence.
Hmm.
Mm.
It doesn't matter if like this has been an acknowledgement elsewhere of this has been an acknowledgement elsewhere of like Christians, many Christians, I want to hedge this on some level for a couple of reasons. Many Christians do not do charitable giving in the way that like we would say of I gave money to the Immune Deficiency Foundation during this last blow up because it was both to show support for a bunch of like people I really like, and then also to give money to a good cause. I want money to be spent on helping people with immune deficiency syndromes. Like so I do this like I did I gave money in this way, and it's like most people within Christianity don't do that. They give to the church. And we can talk about whether or not the church does good things. Some of them do, many of them don't. But they view that as the same, and so therefore, well, I give this on my church
Mm.
becomes the
Mm-hmm.
same as, well, I'm a good person because, well, you're giving to the church, so obviously that's a good thing. And it's like, well, no, because your church just bought another private jet for their pastor, but it owns it as an asset so that he doesn't have to pay taxes on it. But he's the only one that's allowed to use it.
It's an I'm interested like listening to the conversation because like yeah, I was raised Christian, I was raised Catholic, but I was raised like Like, and no, let's not get started on the myriad issues facing. Like, as we all know, Catholicism, which has famously never had any issues ever with anything socially or politically.
Irish Catholicism in particular.
Irish Catholicism in particular.
Catholicism in Ireland exists in a weird spot where it is both colonizer and colonized, and hope we will save that conversation for hopefully when Sinners wins a bunch of Oscars.
Oh God, yeah. So it's because I have been to some Protestant services. You know, I have like half of my in-laws are Methodists, and some of them are practicing Methodists in that they go to church. So I've been to like Methodist services, but like let's face it, the Methodist Church is it's one of the less crazy Protestant denominations. If we're on a sliding scale here, it's a they're just hanging out and having a good time
Mm-hmm.
Doing potlucks.
doing potlucks.
Love potluck.
We love a potluck.
I'm not interested. I'm not interested in converting anytime soon, but a potluck could sway me. So, so my personal experience with religion in general, Christianity specifically, is within the Catholic Church. Born, like most people who are or were Catholic. I was born in it, you know, baptized when I was like 10 days old, so I have to assume my parents had figured it was a good idea. Went through the whole rigmarole, like, did my first communion, did my confirmation, all that sort of stuff, got a lot of money, bought a computer, and it was all downhill from there. But it's interesting when we talk about like people who like getting converts in, as opposed to people who are raised in it, because I was I'm thinking like I you get the sense that like maybe you can agree with me or disagree, I don't know, but for me in my personal like experience, coming from a predominantly Catholic nation whose friends were predominantly Catholic, it feels like when you're raised in it, you start to see, like, you can call bullshit on it a lot with a lot more ease. Like it become because you're raised in it. I was raised in Catholicism, and I distinctly remember the day started really having doubts about whether or not like I was all in on this whole Catholic thing. I was to quote the philosopher, to paraphrase the philosopher, I think I was done worshiping Cathol. And and it was basically like it was at a big outdoor mass. We were in Faughart, which is ostensibly the birthplace of Saint Bridget, and there's a whole bunch of shrines there, and like outdoor masses in Ireland, because given our weather, that's a great idea. We would like completely, all right, completely, it's not related at all, but every year we'd have a cemetery Sunday. You would go out to the cemetery next to the church, and you'd have mass there.
You had mass out in the cheap showiness of nature?
If that's like if having mass surrounded by basically the graves of everyone who has ever lived in your community is not the most pagan fucking thing
Mm-hmm.
I have ever heard in
Next thing you're gonna tell me, you left out like bread and milk out on, out on the porch for angels, I guess.
but I distinctly remember going to this mass basically because we were all going, so I was going, and they had a priest there, and he was giving his sermon, and he starts to go off on like homosexuality and that, and I'm standing there listening to this on a like overcast early spring day, and it was like one of those moments where I was like, I don't I don't think this, no, like, as to same as earlier, I don't think this fits, like, I don't this doesn't exactly square with everything I've supposedly been told about God and Jesus and all that sort of stuff. And so for me, like, I'm approaching Marjoe, the documentary, and I'm approaching kind of Pentecostal Christianity, Protestantism in really from this outside perspective. So I'm appreciating the sort of perspective from people who who had like firsthand experience of that. Like my firsthand experience has all been basically like that just doesn't happen. Like you might get the occasional priest who has like a very like powerful sermon, but in my experience, most of those guys were just very boring. It was very milk toast, you know, forwarded emails from grandma stories, you know. And you know, the nice thing about Catholic mass is you go anywhere in the world in any language, you know what's happening. It's just the same. It's the routine. It's the ceremony of it. So to to kind of witness that through this documentary and through similar documentaries, but to have the luxury of like in this documentary Marjoe Gortner himself explaining this is how the system works. I don't like it, but this is how the system works. Now go watch me. Now you can come and watch me, you know, work the system. And then also kind of like getting both of your perspectives on it as well, like, you know, like having seen at least some of the system and recognized it for what it was. It's fascinating to compare and contrast.
What's kind of interesting in retrospect is that you're right that both Val and I were raised in American Protestantism very broadly.
Mm,
Mine was never quite as intense as either of what you were describing. My mother actually left the Catholic Church when I was about a year old over their stance on abortion.
mm,
But that's actually kind of relevant because 1972 for Pentecostal evangelical Christianity is kind of like right in the middle of a pretty major societal shift. You know, Pat Robertson had started the 700 Club, but it wasn't on cable yet. Wouldn't be on cable until I want to say 76 or 77.
He's basically you hear them referring to magazines, and I'm pretty sure they're referring to Pat Robertson.
Yeah, I'm like 90% certain that's Pat Robertson. May he burn in
mm,
hell.
Yeah, TBN started in 1973, like the Trinity Broadcast Network.
And you know the upcoming election at the point this movie came out, not 72 but 76, is
mm,
is an election that got handed to Jimmy Carter in large part because of the Catholic vote, and over Jimmy Carter's presidency the right wing Christian evangelicals worked very hard and
mm,
very focused to make to sort of, I don't want to say infect because it's not quite this word I'm looking for, but to get American Catholics and American evangelicals into political alignment.
mm.
To get that is this we are basically like right on the cusp of the beginning of the religious right at the point in this movie.
Yeah, like this is when
Yeah.
you start seeing Protestants, for instance, start caring about
Abortion.
abortion,
Mm,
which historically Protestants didn't care about. Protestants do not have the same doctrine of like there is obviously like theologically like there's a shared sacredness of life, but not to the extent that
yeah.
Catholicism has. So before,
Not every sperm is sacred when you're a Protestant.
yeah, which
Yeah.
is why Protestants go to war. You know, there's no, they never had to start engaging. They never had to have a doctrine of a just
Mm.
to then overturn in what 2018.
But and speaking of Catholics, we had just, I want to say, like 10 years earlier, had Vatican II.
mm,
This is a time of real religious upheaval in the Christian world, and I feel like this is a very ground level documentary. It is an extreme. It is like we've mostly been talking about Christianity and how it works. We barely talk about it as a film. It is an extremely effectively edited and
mm.
shot documentary.
Yeah.
It is it there is no fat, but like at the same time it is exactly how long it needs to be. It's I never like I was kind of surprised when I looked at the progress bar and it's like, "Oh, I've got 20 minutes left." But at the same
Mm.
time I got to the end of it and I was thought like I don't know where I would add more to this.
I was sitting there in my bed watching the movie, and he's got to the scene where he's walking through the woods with his girlfriend, basically doing the preacher voice as a joke to his dog. And I'm like, this is a perfect ending scene. I hope they end it here. And bam, there come the credits.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 90 minutes long, and you know, and yeah, there's no yeah, it's hard to say anything about it as a film, because as you both rightly point out, like it's it's supremely well edited. Like it tells a fascinating and and like just very intriguing story from start to finish. You watch the whole kind of like roller coaster of this really final tour that Marjoe is going on,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to really know this guy in the space of like, yeah, in like 90 minutes. You get to know who he is, what he's about, his history, where he wants to go. You know, like you watch him interacting with other people who are other preachers, other people who are in a church. The really really awkward periods there with his, where he's like in the same room as his father, and the kind of just growing, like the underlying tension that exists there. And it never gets dull. It
Mm-hmm.
could get you it could get really dull to just kind of watch him go from one one church to the next, whatever, doing his routine. He switches it up every now and again, but it never gets dull. Like it is very energetically edited. It keeps you going. And then, yeah, at the very end, where it kind of at the very end where it just all slows down, and they interview his girlfriend. They talk to him, and it's like this. You end up like hoping the best for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating on some level that I don't think they ever. So like obviously at the end he explains how he needs to get out. He wants to go and become a musician or an actor. And hey, we know now from history he became an actor.
Mm.
And it's but at the same time I don't think you can watch it. It's very good at using juxtaposition to like at the same like you're watching it and I don't think there's any question that he is going to leave
Mm-hmm.
before he ever says it, because it is almost impossible to square him on stage doing this thing, and I see the coming of the Lord. Like there's no way to square that with him in these more candid moments, just talking about like, yeah, I was 14 and I walked away and I spent some time living with an older woman, and like she showed me the mothering that I never had.
Mm-hmm.
And like his conversation, like the just kind of casual cynicism that in which he talks about like the process of getting these people to go through. And like so it's impossible to like see those juxtaposed with each other and not kind of connect, oh, he's done, because there's no way you can keep doing that and believe what he's doing and also still like come across like with he doesn't have the sliminess. And like obviously this is entirely like vibes phrenology
Mm.
of like he doesn't have like the sliminess that you'd see of like a cult of a career con man who's just going to keep going back. As like, there's no way to connect the fact that by all indication he like, he was like a chill dude with the way he's talking about his experiences, and then seeing him up on stage and not try to like eventually kind of come to the conclusion that he's just finding a way out.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then he says it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, yeah, there you go.
I do think this was kind of like, again, like he says, like, as long as I have this option anytime I'm hard up for cash, it's just gonna be like I could just do this. So this is a bridge burning,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and in a lot of ways, I don't know, like the space was about to contract. You were about to have to basically have an in with Pat Robertson or one of his ghouls
Or the Crouches, yeah.
to get on the air. I'm always a big fan of documentaries from over a certain age ago, because like we have the cultural idea of what the 70s look like, but like, nah, man, that's it. That's the 70s right there that he's just hanging around in.
Mhm.
And I think I'm really grateful I rolled this. I Part of me wonders if it was a very influential movie, because I feel like Kid Preacher is kind of like a stock character at this point. The X Files has one in one episode. The House has one in one episode. But it was like lost until 2002, believe it or not.
Wow.
Well, and it's like Marjoe's obviously a famous one, but like at the same time, like he's not the only one. Al Sharpton was a child preacher. So it is a type, it is an archetype, but it is a faded one. And which is I think kind of very fascinating in that regard.
If you're wondering, if those of you who appreciate Zandy cameos on my episodes are wondering what his input on this movie was, he heard Marjoe say hallelujah at one point and became completely convinced it got sampled in a Chemical Brothers song, but he couldn't find it.
Now the hunt begins.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's obviously, like, the fact that it disappeared is like,
It best movies that won an Oscar being lost is a lot rarer than you might think, given how long the Oscars have been around. I think there's only like one or two in the feature length categories. There are a bunch of shorts that are lost.
Mm.
But this didn't win in a year that was completely devoid. Malcolm X and Manson were both nominated this year, and I'm really grateful that they found it
Mm.
in a archive in New York.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like like you don't even see. I mean, like, a friend of ours recently pointed out that the niche articles are very easy to just kind of slide some nonsense in for, and it stays there for 10 years on Wikipedia. But like, it's telling that like they can't even find anything about oh, this went on to do such and such, or like referenced here, or it like appears somewhere else. It just kind of wins an Academy Award and then goes straight to disappearing.
And then it winds up where all really good movies that won Oscars but aren't super famous wind up, which is
Tubi.
Tubi.
To be.
Poob has it for you.
Except for like Connor, the first episode of the show Connor was ever on was a really good also movie from the 70s that won Best Actor and isn't like available in any legal format to this day. Go buy an out of print DVD
Keep circulating the tapes.
or hit up Daily Motion, I guess.
Oh man, yeah. Now I'm just bummed because that's one film that is practically impossible to find, at least legally. Marjoe disappeared for like 30 years and only got re-released because they found the negative. Otherwise, it also would have just disappeared for good, and you would have only ever seen like scratchy, faded versions of it on the Internet Archive. We are losing an awful lot of great cinematic art, and that'll bum me out. Thanks, Ellie.
One of the few movies that Marjoe kind of starred in is a movie called Star Crash,
Oh,
which was riffed in the first reboot season of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a show that for a very long time and in some parts to this day existed primarily as tapes people circulated
mm.
as Google Drives or Mega Zips or
It's so funny, like you bringing that up because when I saw that you had rolled Marjoe, and I looked it up and I was like, Marjoe Gortner, why does that guy look familiar? It's the Star Crash dude. Oh, I gotta get in on this. That guy was a child preacher. Let me read. Wow, this guy's life is crazy.
right?
Yeah. Also, like anybody who has never seen Star Crash, you owe it to yourself to watch it. Like the Rift version, or if you can find it, like just the original version, you owe it to yourself to watch this wonderful Star Wars ripoff, starring a young David Hasselhoff, Marjoe Gortner, and in the role of the Emperor, Christopher Plummer, who, when asked why he did Star Crash, Christopher Plummer's response was simply, "Well, they were shooting in Rome. I would have done a porno if it meant going to Rome."
I love dudes who are that blunt about it.
Oh yeah, it's the I don't remember the what does Michael Caine say? I don't remember such and such movie, but I remember the
Jaws 4,
yeah. It's like, and I remember
the house that it bought me.
the house, or like the extension it built on my house or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like regarding the like the potential loss, I have had conversations in trying to phrase this very specifically for like, but like I've had conversations with people about how like there are effectively like bomb shelters in Southern California that are just full of nitrate film reels that it's just kind of one of those where they have to be stored this way because they're being stored so that they don't decompose and they don't combust. But it's just like one of those where it's like, yeah, no, we all know that it's there and everyone knows that it has to be like preserved rapidly before it just like before something bad happens to it. It's just a matter of like the scope of the project is just a massive undertaking, even for some of the companies that exist in Hollywood for whom this is like relevant to. And it's just like, yeah, there is a lot of just like, well, the negative exploded, or it's in a vault somewhere waiting to be digitized. And it has to stay in the vault because otherwise it'll explode.
I I think my parting thought would be that a few days before we recorded this, Tom Lehrer passed.
Mm.
And Tom Lehrer was, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know why anyone listening to this would know, Tom Lehrer was an incredible influence on my like sense of humor, for lack of a better term. I discovered Songs and More Songs by Tom Lehrer before I discovered The Simpsons. Like that is how formative that was to me. And a few years before he died, he put all of his music up on the Internet Archive just for anyone who wants it.
Mm.
And I think that is an instinct that is worth pursuing. You know, art is worth preserving.
Tom Lehrer was a real one.
Tom Lehrer was a real one.
I was gonna say it was. I mean, like, kind of in the same vein. If it wasn't for the fact that Woody Guthrie refused to copyright like his music, who knows what would have happened? Because it allowed, all of the folk musicians that came after him to actually like, popularize those songs that he had basically just written and kind of had gone
Unremarked.
unremarked upon for most of his his life.
On that note, Connor, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Well, if you've got $20, if you got $10, if you got whatever you've got in your wallet, if you want to give it to me right now, I would definitely appreciate it.
Happy dude.
You can find me on. If you give me money, I'll be a happy dude, and I won't robocall you 24 hours a day. We're all millennials here. All of our humor is based on satirists and The Simpsons. Anyway, yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky. I am at young Mr. Duffy. I post there occasionally but I'm mostly just a reskeet, which is still the worst possible word the Blue Sky community could have chosen.
And we did it on purpose.
Was that the rent lowering gunshots, Vel?
That's not the only rent lowering gunshots that we do on that site.
You can also find my wife and I, Katie and I, we have an itch page. It's Turd Country Press is the name of our little outfit. We make funny RPGs. If you've ever wanted to play a bunch of one hit point goblins who are trying to steal a cake, we've got a game for that. If you've ever broken into an old Kmart and found it full of black mold, like a bunch of kids in our town did, we've got a game for that. And you can also find us weekly, every Thursday live on BFF.FM, Third Country Radio, where on the day we recorded this, I know that this will be broadcast like many moons from when we are recording this, but
Like 2 weeks.
yeah, okay, all right, that's not so bad. Okay, 2 weeks ago we did a tribute to Ozzy Osbourne and Tom Lehrer, so go and check that out in the archives.
Vel, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
I mean, if you want to see me shitpost and occasionally post painted Warhammer minis, you can find me on Blue Sky at snakegirls.net. Yes, that's real.
Whoever plays Warhammer must be a huge nerd.
Yeah, I know, right? Just the biggest nerd. But all Warhammer players inherently attractive. But I don't do anything else other than that, so that's about it. Give money to the Iron Mouse IDF donation thing because it's worth your time.
Cool IDF.
Yeah,
Cool IDF.
no, not that one. The other IDF, the good one.
Instructions unclear, firing rocket.
The one that helps people, not the one that kills Palestinian children.
As always, you can find me, Ellie, on Tumblr at Football in Tuxedos with dashes between the words. You can find me on Blue Sky, Medium, and Letterboxd at LSR42. And you can find this podcast on Blue Sky at Biggest Night Pod. We are available on both Spotify and YouTube. And if you follow us on YouTube, be sure to give us a subscribe, maybe like and comment on the video so that you can tell me which parts you like and which parts you don't. Thanks to both Connor and Vel for coming out tonight. That was quite an interesting conversation, but I really haven't gotten enough of Connor or his wife talking about music. So for our next episode, we are in fact going to snap back to reality when I bring Connor and Katie on to talk about 8 Mile. Yes, 8 Mile won an Oscar. See you there.